The 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry Regiment mustered for a 3-year term in the Union Army at the onset of the Civil War in 1861. They participated in 26 battles and numerous skirmishes. The killed and wounded of their most famous battles were 20% at the First Battle of Bull Run, 28% at Antietam, and a horrific 82% casualties at Gettysburg. On July 21st, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, the regiment fought in the first major battle of the war, the First Battle of Bull Run. This was a Confederate victory from Brigadier Generals Johnson and Jackson. The Confederates firmly stood their ground, and Jackson received his famous nickname, Stonewall Jackson. The 1st Minnesota was one of the last regiments to leave the battlefield and had among them the highest casualties of any in the Union. On September 17th, 1862, General John Sedgwick's ill-fated attempt at Antietam ended in another Confederate victory for General Robert E. Lee. The Union Brigade commander noted, "The 1st Minnesota fired with so much coolness and accuracy that they brought down one of the Confederate flags 3 times and finally cut the staff in 2. The men of the 1st Minnesota are most remembered for their heroic actions on July 2nd, 1863, during the second day's fighting at Gettysburg, where the regiment prevented the Confederates of General Longstreet from pushing the Union troops off Cemetery Ridge. As other Union troops were passing in confused retreat with 2 Confederate brigades in pursuit of them, General Hancock rode up to the 1st Minnesota, the only organized Union troops at hand, pointed to the advancing Confederates and ordered them to take those colors. Hancock's purpose was to buy minutes of time to bring up reinforcements, minutes of time bought with human lives, the lives of the 1st Minnesota, who would be greatly outnumbered. The order was instantly repeated by Colonel William Colville, who led a bayonet charge down a slippery slope and directly into the concentrated fire of the 2 Confederate brigades. The Confederates were surprised when out of the smoke, a line of Union troops came running toward them, firing and charging with leveled bayonets. The flag of the fell 5 times and was raised again each time. After being knocked out by a bullet to the head and later shot in the hand, Corporal Henry O'Brien repeatedly picked up the colors of the fallen 1st Minnesota's flag and carried a wounded combat back to Union lines. Although nearly surrounded by the enemy, the remnants of the 1st Minnesota held the Confederates at bay for almost 30 minutes, which bought the time needed for Union reinforcements to arrive. This suicidal bayonet charge saved the battlefield for the Union. This 82% casualty rate, which includes severely wounded commander Colonel Colville and all but 3 of his captains, stands to this day as the largest loss by any surviving military unit in military history in a single day's engagement. The few survivors rallied back to General Hancock. The next day, the survivors were supposedly given a safe position for the 3rd day of the battle. But destiny placed these remaining Minnesotans at one of the few places where Union lines were breached during Pickett's charge and required them once again to charge advancing Confederates. During this desperate and chaotic fighting, Private Marshal Sherman captured the colors of the 28th Virginia Infantry and received a Medal of Honor for his exploits. The Confederate flag was taken back to Minnesota as a prize of war. In summary, the 1st Minnesota performed one of the most critical actions of the Battle of Gettysburg during the Confederates' assault on Cemetery Ridge. Their sacrificial bayonet charge against overwhelming odds halted the Confederate advance and brought time for the Union lines to reform. This forced General Robert E. Lee into one last desperate gamble with the ill-fated Pickett's charge the next day. The 1st Minnesota survivors of the previous day played a role in repulsing this charge, which ended the Battle of Gettysburg, secured a major victory for the Union, and served as a turning point in the war. After the battle, General Hancock said he knew the 1st Minnesota would lose heavily at Cemetery Ridge, and it caused him great pain to give the order for them to advance. But he knew he would have done it, even if he would have known that every man would have been killed. It was a sacrifice that had to be made. Every war is a gory road to glory. After 3 years of military service, The 1st Minnesota arrived in St. Paul to a rousing reception and a parade in February 1864. Upon their return, the 1st Minnesota Regiment was comprised of only 325 survivors out of the original strength of 1,000 men. The flag of the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry is on proud display in the Minnesota Capitol's Rotunda. The captured battle flag of the 28th Virginia remains at the Minnesota Historical Society. The men of the 1st Minnesota never lost a color nor turned their backs to a foe, and there is not one but 3 well-deserved monuments for the 1st Minnesota at the Gettysburg battlefield.